Thanks for joining World's Best Boss featuring Anthemos Georgiades. I hope we're pronouncing it correctly. Co-founder and CEO of Zumper. So this is being recorded. We'll send an email with a link once it's ready. Don't hesitate on dropping your questions in the Q&A, or there's a chat as well. So just let us know if you have any live questions during the event. Passing the mic to you, Anish.
Yeah, just a very quick introduction. So my background was actually working with technology startups within San Francisco, leading growth, digital marketing, so forth with a few different companies, and then transitioned to actually hiring for those same companies within leadership roles across marketing, product, analytics, and design, and actually started building up an executive recruiting firm quite a few years ago. Now we're a team of 9. We still work with fast-growing startups, and our focus is basically hiring executive level talent across non-engineering roles for a wide variety of companies.
You can introduce yourself. You don't have to say all of this, but give us a little intro on yourself.
Well, hey, nice to meet you all. I'm Anthemos, so Greek name, British accent. I'm the CEO of Zumper. We're based in San Francisco. We are an apartment rental platform. The mission of our company is to make renting an apartment as easy as booking a hotel. We have about 80 million users a year. So about 1 in 3 adult Americans will use Zumper this year to look for their next home. About 15 million visits a month. So we got pretty big, but we don't just want to be known as a search platform. We're trying to build a full-on transaction platform for a 1-year lease. And excited to be here today and answer any of your questions and share all the mistakes we made getting this far.
Nice. Yeah. And for everyone who is joining us for the first time, this is maybe our 7th or so of these live events. We try to bring in leaders generally across startups who can teach us about how they build culture, grow talent, and overall do everything they can to maintain that culture at various different stages of their company. So we've had a lot of CEOs, VCs, executives of popular companies. And yeah, we're excited to have this event. Cool. So we crowdsource questions very frequently for all of this. For this event, for people who are RSVP, they'll send us different questions to ask people like Anth. And actually, one question we didn't put on the deck that had been asked by multiple people, how did you come up with the name Zumper? It's interesting. Multiple people were curious about that.
Yes, it's a good example of, oh, this is my son. My son came to say hi. Hello, Theo. Hello. Hello. Hi, I'm just on a call. So Zumper is one of those names that you could have come up with one random night when you're playing with an idea, never thinking you're going to be on a call with a bunch of people or the company with 200 people explaining why you got there. So Zumper, I was at grad school in the US and I was playing around with the idea for Zumper, which is building an e-commerce platform for apartment rentals. So how can you close your apartment and online? And it came from my own frustration with renting, where so many times I've gone to open houses, and as many of you guys know, you could have submitted an application, it goes into the ether and you don't know what happens. And in British English, so I grew up in London, and in British English, there's this word to gazump, which is G-A-Z-U-M-P, which means to take a real estate deal at the very last second. And that's kind of what we wanted to build, which was like an open platform where someone could go into an open house, pull out their phone, make a great offer, and actually transact on the apartment. So it's kind of like a play on the word gazump. So we called it Zumper. And it was really like a working project that kind of then spiraled into an actual company. So it's a cool name because it's unique and it doesn't mean anything. So you can kind of embed it with meaning from all sides. But yeah, there's no way if I'd thought about it more seriously, I necessarily would have ended up on it. I just, we never knew quite how big it would get.
Nice. And of course, you're using a British term, launching a company in the US. So when you try to explain Gazump, absolutely, does anybody get it, or has people in the real estate industry, even in the US, have they been like, oh yeah, Gazump, I know that word?
Nothing. So it's a great question. We get it all the time from VCs when we raise from them. And I think there's like a lot of kind of examples of other companies where they have this advantage of no one knows what they mean, which means you can kind of build it into anything. So like a good counter example is, or good similar example is Zillow, where like, I think it came from like a zillion pillows. I think that's where the name Zillow came from, if I'm not mistaken, although it's almost 20 years old now. So no one knows what Zillow means, but it probably meant something to the founders on day zero. It may have even been an in-joke. And then before you know it, it becomes something bigger.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we named this company after a rap song. So
Yep.
I didn't think 7 years later. No, actually, I registered this name in 2013. So I didn't think, 7 years later, that we would still have the same name. But here we are. And a minute ago, we were talking about some of the funding that you guys have raised. Obviously, you even mentioned you sort of built this company and didn't imagine how big it would end up being. And now, you guys have raised roughly $140 million, 200-ish plus employees across the country, multiple offices. What goes into the decision-making process of, staying small versus kind of like going for hitting a home run? And was that difficult for you to say, okay, look, I'm not going to stay small and maybe make choices that make us profitable faster. I'm going to keep going and hit a home run. Like, what was sort of like your internal debate? And was there even an internal debate, or was it very obvious to you from the very beginning that this was your vision?
Yeah, so this is my my first company. Before this, I was at BCG, the consulting firm, for a number of years, and I worked in British politics as like a speechwriter. So weird route into tech. Never thought I'd be a CEO. I didn't do this to be a CEO. I did this to like solve a problem that I had throughout my 20s. And now I'm doing it. There's no way back. It's kind of a wonderful job. It's super stressful. I never knew how. Sorry, I'm just going to let my son in, and I'm going to return. He's going to keep banging on the window. 1 second.
Please.
Hey, all right, I'm back. Sorry, my son came back from his walk, and my wife did not hear him, so he was just banging on the window. He's 3, so he was confused. So we raised venture capital at the beginning because it was the best way to test an assumption of like, okay, does this have legs? And so the early round we raised was like $1 million from like Kleiner, Andreessen, Greylock, and NEA. But the minute you raise venture capital, you're kind of in the game. Unless you build a profitable business like immediately afterwards, like you are relying on venture capital going forward, because the game then is like steal market share like really quickly, and then use venture capital to kind of reinvest your revenue so you don't need to worry about being profitable, and like steal market share today because it will be more expensive tomorrow. And I think that's the general mantra that a lot of VC-backed companies have had for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So once you raise the seed round, and definitely once you raise the Series A, you're kind of in the game. And so before you know it, you're a venture-backed company that is expected to like triple every year in terms of your revenue and your user base, and is expected to probably raise money every 18 to 24 months. And there are absolutely counterexamples of companies that like Instagram, who didn't need to go that path and just got acquired for $1 billion, or companies that become profitable after like their first fundraise. But for most venture-backed companies that end up going public, which is probably our kind of our current path, you're kind of on this track of raising every 2 years and delivering like delusionally high growth every 2 years. So the upside is you get to an answer of how big your company could be faster than any other method. The downside is you put an enormous amount of pressure on yourself and your team, and you sell the majority of your company on the path to doing it. If you pick the right investors, you pick amazing guides on the way that help you get to the end. So it's worth it. But like we were saying before this, Anish, like you could build wonderful companies that sell for a lot of money or generate a lot of cash flow without raising venture capital. It's just that this kind of a company that relied on going from 0 users a month to now like 14 million required venture capital to build that moat. And it took a long time, and it would have taken a lot longer without the capital injection.
Makes a ton of sense. And that's interesting. You took money from Andreessen, Kleiner, and NEA in a $1 million round. Those are all very like late stage, large companies. That's interesting. So they chose you to do seed. How did that work, considering they're known? for bigger investments?
It's really changed. This was like back in 2013. So we're 7.5 years old now. And back in 2013, it was when like Andreessen was like backing every YC company automatically. And they were doing like seed checks, like left, right, and center. And we were one of those seed checks. The world has changed. I think now, as you say, a lot of those investors do more sophisticated like A and B rounds. And they've got these super angels and super seed funds who do the early stage stuff. So yeah, it was kind of a weird one. And candidly, it was like a risky one because when you have 4 brand name VCs in your seed round, putting in like 200 grand each, if one of them doesn't step up to do your Series A, you're screwed because the signal effect of like, hey, Kleiner put in $250,000 in your seed, but they didn't lead your Series A. Why is that? So we had to basically raise our Series A from one of our seed investors, which we did, but we would have been in a tough position if we hadn't. So it's risky.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people who haven't raised money before or haven't been close to that money raising process don't understand how much signal matters. I talked to Thumbtack. Thumbtack was one of the clients that I worked with in the growth world. And, they basically said they were a few weeks going out of business until Jason Kokonis, who has a name, said, I'll put a little bit of money in. And then the only reason other people put money into the company was just because someone who has a name put money in. And they're like, well, if he says we'll put money in, then I guess, if he says he's putting money in, then I guess we will. He's done his research and he knows what he's doing. So that signal is so important.
The signal is massive. Like when I think about those early stage VCs, they, even though I don't have, obviously Kleiner are our biggest investor because they've re-upped multiple times since, but like when we went that way, we didn't have Andreessen re-up or Greylock re-up because we had Kleiner. But Andreessen and Greylock from the early stages, I mean, like our first 10 hires were almost entirely because we had those names on our cap table. Like even though they only had a couple of $100,000, like I'm a first-time CEO, I'm an immigrant to the US, like I didn't have a network here. It's helped solve the chicken and egg of like, how do you attract next level talent before you have a beacon that you've been a successful entrepreneur? I think entrepreneurs who've been very successful the first time find it very easy to attract talent the second time, either from their networks or from people that know who they are. But the first time, like so many of us, you've got to solve that chicken and egg of how do you attract talent when no one knows who the hell you are. And those brand names, to your point about the signal, help solve the chicken and egg.
Absolutely, which is a great segue into a lot of our more talent and recruiting and culture oriented questions. But yeah, I mean, obviously from the side of recruiting for us, one of the first questions we get from a lot of candidates is how much did this company raise? They don't ask as much about kind of who the startup's raised from, but if the number is a high enough amount, they're it kind of checks that box for them. So I guess the first question from the audience is, and from the RSVPs is, what do you look for when making hiring decisions? Do you have sort of a framework that, this human being needs to touch upon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of check marks for you to be excited about them?
Yeah. This is what we do at Zumper. I don't know if it's the right one. It may be completely delusional, but my general philosophy to hiring is that IQ is table stakes. So I know how important intelligence is, but like there's lots of intelligent people out there. And especially as companies move to remote, like we're going to be able to tap in to a lot of other talent, especially if given COVID and companies being open to more remote talent, like there's a lot of really smart people there. And so whereas my training, having been at like Harvard Business School and like BCG and Oxford was all about like brands and elites and like IQ, you learn very quickly that's not correct. And, lots of people who didn't go to college have phenomenal IQ. And so IQ is table stakes. It doesn't matter where people went to college or where they worked before. You can find raw IQ anywhere. The two things we look for that get a hire through the door instead of kind of not through the door is kind of resilience and then for how they fit our cultural values. And that's what dictates what makes someone successful at Zumper and probably many other startups. So on the first one, resilience, lots of the smartest people I've known in my life are the least resilient. They're the people who've had everything go right for them in their life. They went to like Harvard undergrad, went to Goldman, went back to Harvard Business School, went to a hedge fund, like everything went right, or they had every advantage and privilege in their life for things to go right. And when something doesn't go right, they're the first to get spooked because they've often never had to fight for it. And resilience is a key hallmark of an entrepreneur or an early stage employee at a company. So IQ is table stakes, but resilience is key. And so I would take a resilient hire any day over some hire who had every brand name on their resume, but like would get spooked because startups are hard and our growth curve looks amazing. It looks top right, but it's not the truth. Our monthly numbers that look amazing are aggregations of like daily wiggles where for every up there's a down and for every up there's a down, and you need someone who can ride those ups and downs and have the emotional stability to get through it because it is difficult, as all of you know. The second thing we look for is how people conform to the cultural values. So we have internal cultural values that we manage performance on, that we reward performance on, and that we hire for. And for every hire, increasingly now, we have a culture interview where they have to do well against those cultural values. And for example, we don't need like NASA level like excellence at Zumper in terms of our code. We need to move quickly, deploy stuff and see if it works. We don't need someone who's used to building like 2-year code sprints before they know whether it's going to work or not. And so having values like that help us sift through really smart, resilient people, but who might have worked at NASA or Microsoft for their career, who don't understand what it's like to deploy code 3 times a week or 3 times a day, which is what Zumper does. So anyway, IQ is table stakes. Resilience and conformity with our cultural values is then what gets people through the door.
That's amazing. And you would actually be an anomaly from a lot of what I consider is the formula for what a lot of the clients we've worked with and a lot of the founders we worked with look for. So my hiring philosophy across the board, and this has generally been true, is that what founders look for in terms of hiring is they attempt to just consistently hire themselves over and over again. And from our clients who have sort of Ivy League backgrounds, they're obsessed with whoever they hire to also have an Ivy League or Stanford or whatever in their resume. So you actually go against that and aren't sort of caught up. And this has been very, very, very true across our clients. Let's say there's like the early 20s Y Combinator, college dropout, they're also, if they're hiring, they're also looking for that kind of person as well, that kind of young college dropout hackery. If someone's, let's say, a little bit later in their career and they had like a 20-year corporate career and they became a CEO after the end of that like 20-year corporate career and they have an MBA, they just want someone else who also like has 20 plus years of experience, also has an MBA. Or on the other end, if someone didn't go to a great school, they're just like, I don't care about school at all. I just want to see someone who can perform their job really well. So kudos to you for not just sort of consistently trying to hire yourself over and over again.
Well, I think we got there through mistakes. I mean, I'm sure I have, as much as I think I don't have my own internal biases, I'm sure I do. But the evidence, like at the end of the day, I'm like, could have a mathematical background and like, it's just the stats prove it's not true. And like, look, I went to like Oxford, Cambridge, and Harvard in my education. So I was wildly risk averse, and I didn't come from money. It wasn't like a predestined thing for me. Like I fought to get to these places. And the truth is there are lots of really clever people at these institutions, but then no cleverer than people outside them. They're just risk averse people like myself who early in our careers wanted those stamps of approval. But, I look at my HBS class and like 10% of them will go off to like change the world, but they don't have any skill set that people outside HBS don't have. They just got hyped and like got given the self-confidence to go and do it. And so I think like, if you can give that self-confidence to people we hire or founders I invest in, that they're like, you can do this. I've been at HBS. You're smarter than most people I went to college with. Like, I think it's just that step up. And I think with like Black Lives Matter and the social movements you've seen in the last 3 months, it's never been more important to make that point that like everyone's an imposter. No one knows what they're doing. And these people that sit on stages and say, they have a predestined right to be on stage and they're these unique entrepreneurs who like got there and they have these things that you don't have. They're kind of lying because it serves their brand to say that. And I've know that the hard way, because I've sat in the audiences and then I've sat on stage, but I'm the same person who is the insecure person in the audience thinking I could never do that. And now I'm the guy on stage and I'm like, these people listening to every word I say, but like I'm making this up. And like every week I find out something I'm bad at that we correct for. So all I have is just more experience and more mistakes. And I think that's ultimately what careers are built on. But anyway, I appreciate it. But it's just it's a selfish strategy. I want to recruit the best people at Zumper, and the best people look very different.
That's no, I mean, that's super valid. And I saw a blog post from the CEO of Masterclass talking about the 9 things he's learned. And one of them was literally just being a CEO. One was your job will change every year. And number 2 is you will always think you're doing a bad job. And I think there is some of that level of humbleness that will make someone a good CEO, right? Like if you walk into a room and say like, I'm so good at this, you've probably already lost some kind of game, because your learning curve is probably not really where your aptitude toward learning, and your interest in growing your learning curve just isn't going to be there with that.
I haven't read that, Anish, but it's a great point. And I think the other advantage of your point about every year you kind of become a new CEO or you kind of reinvent yourself is you have to do that for your team. Like Zumper's 7 years old now, and a lot of our best people are still here, and a lot of them have been here from the beginning. So like we have, like my team has like 5-6 years tenure on a lot of the execs, and they've now kind of grown through the company and they've become C-level or on the path to becoming C-level. But the way we've kind of retained people is, honestly, Zumper's felt like a different startup every January, except maybe 1 year back in 2016, 17, where we didn't grow as fast and it felt more samey. And that was a hard year because you couldn't tell the team, hey, we're growing like a rocket ship. But similar to the CEO changing every year, I think the company has to change every year to keep people excited. It's almost like I've run 7 startups at Zumper because every year except maybe 1, it's felt like a different company. So it's motivating to me, but again, kind of cynically, it's really motivating to our team because it's literally like they work at different startups every year and work with different people and face different challenges. So I think it's true of the CEO. And if your team is good and your company is growing, it should be good of every single one of your employees from intern to like COO. They should probably feel the same.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's really great. And that's probably even true if you're going from like, you know, a 7-year journey where you're going from 1 employee to 4 or 5 employees to 10 employees. Like you're still kind of going through that journey. There's 2 questions that both have to do about resiliency, if you wouldn't mind me diving into them. One is how do you vet resilience? Are you just looking for a track record where someone can say, hey, I went through a shit situation and came out on the other side, and I felt good about it? Or, you know, what are you looking for when you're kind of gauging whether someone, you know, either on one side of the spectrum, like just kind of had all the advantages, like you said, or just decided to take the most hedged decisions throughout their entire career, versus someone else who maybe still has a lot of those marks on the resume, but might have more resilience than is shown. I'd love to learn kind of how you vet that.
Yeah, I mean, and vetting, I saw that question come through, is such a good question because you can't ask someone, are you resilient? Like, they're going to say yes. I don't have a magic formula. Some patterns I've noticed. One is failed founders or failed early employees make amazing hires. There are often reasons why other startups didn't work that had nothing to do with the person, but they fought to the final day. We've had 2 or 3 people, a couple of people here now, a couple of people not here now, but who are key members of the journey, who were either kind of failed founders or worked early stage at a company that didn't work. They're the best hires I ever made. They're so resilient because they knew what it takes, and they kind of went down with the ship because they were also loyal, and I love that. So failed early stage people are actually fantastic hires because they've been through the worst. There are also a couple of things like references are really important. I don't spend reference calls asking like, hey, what are the best things about Jenny? It's more like, tell me all the bad things about Jenny. Like, talk to me about real adversity that Jenny faced. Like, talk to me about where she came in on a Monday and she's had the worst week ever the week before. Like, how does she show up? And like questions they're not used to, and you tend to get very real answers, or you can, because they've never had that question before, you can see their pause and it tells you everything. And the other one is like, spend your interviews asking about the bad stuff. So like, I assume my team have asked all the like clever questions. They were interviewing a product manager. I'm assuming they've asked all the clever questions about product and A/B test and statistical significance. I asked them about their failures in their career. So I talk exclusively for half the interview about what they kind of fucked up, what went wrong, what was the biggest failure of their career, what was the biggest disappointment of their career. And like, you hear how someone processes these things. And because again, they're not often asked those questions, especially not repeatedly, I think you hear like the chutzpah of someone and like how they show up, and the goal of asking them. Most people expect I'm asking the question because if they tell me they had a massive failure, I'm going to judge them for it. But it's kind of the opposite, that the right candidates tell you about spectacular failures that like would never show up on their resume and how they dealt with them. And so ironically, the best answers are the worst failures, because we all make mistakes. I want to hear about mistakes. I want you to be real with me, and I want to hear how you overcame them and how you're sitting here today. The best candidates tell you awful mistakes they made. Typically, although this is a generalization, the candidates that don't work out don't really have good examples. And I don't buy it. Like, I've raised 140 million for the company. We're the largest private company in our vertical. We hope to go public. And I've made like thousands of mistakes along the way, including some really big ones. So I don't buy it if candidates haven't made any and aren't ready to kind of commit to them.
I love that. And that was going to be my same advice as well. Ask people about their failures. And I try to see if their eyes light up, or, we interview a lot of marketers, and unfortunately marketers try to talk their way in and out of something instead of just telling you directly what happened, right? They try to reframe a failure as a success when in reality, like, failure is phenomenal. How else are you going to know something didn't work, right? You try it, it fails spectacularly, and you can just say, oh, cool, that didn't work. That was 4 months of my life gone, but now I know. But yeah, similar to what you say, if someone and this is advice to anyone who's interviewing right now for jobs, do not hide your failures. Talk about them very distinctly and in detail, and then come out on the other end and talk about what you learned from that failure, right? I think if you've done everything right in your career, that means you're probably not resilient, because you've never put yourself in a situation of risk. You've always just said no to things that might have a slight tinge of going wrong. And a lot of companies want that person, right? A lot of like the Googles and Facebooks, and a lot of some of our clients as well. They focus on hiring people who have zero red flags instead of hiring people who've sort of seen some level of pattern recognition of things that have gone right and wrong. But for those of you interviewing right now, do not hide your failures. When you're talking about them, enjoy talking about them, because it's like having a really cool scar. You're gonna sound really cool at a party. Now that you're obviously you've grown rapidly. Now that you're have a huge team, what's kind of your secret for effective delegation? And in yesterday's call, you mentioned that this is an area where you've had to do a lot of learning, because things have gone right and not so right within effective delegation. So would love if you can kind of take us through that journey.
Yeah, and I think this is my biggest weakness as a CEO, and I'm not saying that with humility. I'm saying that as something the boards continually tell me, which is every CEO has to reinvent herself as you go from venture stage to growth stage. So like, let's say venture stage is 0 to 10 million in revenue. You're a different CEO to get to 10 million in revenue than you are as a CEO to get to 100 million in revenue, which is the kind of growth stage. And like, what makes you successful to 10 is not what makes you successful to 100. On the way to 10 million as a CEO, you don't delegate a lot of stuff. Even though you start to build an exec team, you're kind of doing everything yourself. You're fundraising, you're selling, you probably still run product, you probably run parts of the growth engine, you run press. You're doing everything. That leap into being a growth stage CEO, where you're like, okay, my job now is to set other people up, a bit like this diagram you have here, and empower them to go and do their thing. That's really hard, because you don't know that works, because what made you successful in stage 1, you haven't seen succeed in stage 2. So the metaphor is really the leap of faith. Every CEO or leader has to take a leap of faith with delegation. And then there are a couple of things that mitigate the leap of faith. One is OKRs. It sounds so boring, But if you have very clear objectives and key results in your company, or KPIs, it doesn't necessarily need to be OKRs, and your managers commit to delivering 2 or 3 KPIs every quarter, you manage to that. Your job is to help that manager manage to those numbers, and objectively, you'll know whether or not delegation works every quarter. So there's quantitative ways to set it up. The other way, and the secret cheat, is to just hire people better than yourself. So it's easy to say that. It's much harder to do it in the early stage before you can attract that level of talent. Like in the first 3 or 4 years of Zumper, my early team were amazing and far better than me, but I found it hard to add to them because we didn't have a brand and we weren't well known. Since we got a little bigger, we've been able to attract ridiculous talent. So like our president and COO is called Vish. He used to be the CEO at Udacity and, built the to 100 million in revenue. And, he's the COO now. And like, he is so better at many parts of his job than I would ever be. And it's kind of insane that he works on my team and we work together. And that's the level of talent you have to attract. And so the kind of secret is, sure, like chicken and egg, once you're big, it's easier to attract this talent. I think the secret would have been, I wish I could go back 2 or 3 years and pay up for these people early and solve the chicken and egg by spending more money, especially on the stock side, because not a lot of companies can afford to pay the salaries. But I wish I'd gone back in time and made monster stock offers to some of these people, COO, we just had a CXO join, heads of product, PMs. I wish we had these people 3 years ago because we would have been further along than we are now. But we got there. But I wish we cheated earlier and just made monster offers to talent earlier on and bridged the gap with stock options.
That's amazing. And we actually ran a salary survey recently where we dissected 186 salaries of people we'd interviewed across different levels, all the way from manager to C-level. And when we looked at the salary changes within different companies, what we learned was that the size of the company, whether it's 40 employees or 4,000, didn't dictate whether someone got a higher salary or not. Let's say comparing VP to VP. What dictated whether somebody got a higher salary, not from a company level, was the age of the company. So you look at the differences in a VP from a company that's 0 to 5 years versus a company that's been around for 15 to 20 years. Those VPs, based off of our data, are making more money. So which almost speaks to, as someone has sat in your shoes over, hiring over and over again, you're just like, fuck it, pay them the money. They're worth it. Don't go cheap with this hire. Like, what's an extra 25K for someone who really, really knows what they're doing?
That point, and like for everyone listening, that is such a key point. What is 25K here or there in the moment feels like a big deal, or 10 basis points here or there on equity in the moment because you're in the heat of negotiation feels like a big deal. I want to highlight what Anish said. Like, that is so true. You never, on a great hire where you just stretched a little bit more, you never regret it. Not once. You never regret it. In fact, for the right hires, you think, shit, I've kind of got them. I'm like so lucky I got them at that level because they're adding 100x that value to the company. So I've made that incorrect decision multiple times, and it's always false economy. It's always false economy. Yeah.
Penny wise, pound foolish, that whole thing. Cool. Grace, let's go to the next one. You covered a lot of this, but I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add. What are the differences between making your 20th hire versus your 200th hire? Although, did you look for someone who maybe is a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more scaled with your 200th hire, and maybe your 20th hire was just like, well, they don't know totally what they're doing, but I like the energy? Or was there any major differences in kind of who you looked for back then versus now?
Yeah. If you took it generically, to say for both, it was like a mid-level hire at the 20th and a mid-level hire at the 200th. Actually, maybe this is contrarian. I think maybe you guys expected like a clever answer here. Actually, no, it's exactly the same. I refuse to have like a culture where number 200 feels like she doesn't matter, or she can hide behind 7 other people and she doesn't have an influence over the outcome of the company. I think like we fail as a company when number 200 doesn't feel her autonomy to deliver numbers. Now, it's far harder to convince number 200 that she matters than it is number 20, because in number 20, in an all hands, she probably speaks every week. In number 200, in an all hands, she doesn't speak every week. But I think the challenge with this company, and like with every company, of how do you avoid becoming this big, boring behemoth who just doesn't move and becomes like a big oil tanker where you can't really move, is you've got to convince each new joiner that they can bend the number themselves. So we look for the same. Even if it's harder to convince them that they can bend the numbers, they can. And we look for the same. We look for owners who are scrappy and autonomous. And yes, to your point, we probably have senior leadership in place to help guide them this time instead of we didn't last time. But I still look for the same. So nothing changed.
Amazing. Like with that 200th person, like, is there some tricks to make them feel special? Because like you mentioned with the 20th person, you can be in all hands, you can take them out to lunch, you can like have these like one-to-one conversations where you're talking high level strategy. But with the 200th, like, it's got to be hard for you to like build those personal relationships where this person feels like they're seen and heard by you. Is it giving your VPs and your C-level people a little bit more of that? Or like, how do you make that person feel like, oh, well, I'm really in here and people know my name and people know who I am?
Yeah, no, it sucks because you just, as the CEO, you want to spend hours with every new hire, and obviously your calendar doesn't allow for that. So I meet every new hire. Like I used to interview everyone, but it doesn't scale anymore. But in their first 2 weeks here, we have onboarding meetings where I'll meet everyone, which is wonderful and great to put names to faces. I think like it's a lame answer, but like OKRs help. Like if you do OKRs properly, each person cascades their KRs down to themselves, aka like every person has a number or a project that rolls up into the objective of the company. And so they feel uniquely like responsible for helping, and that if their piece misses, the whole thing kind of misses. So you can kind of use like the numbers that you manage your quarters to help guide this. And then there's obviously like recognition in all hands and kind of coffee meetings and stuff. But I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like, what have you seen work? Because it's difficult. And whereas Zumper has a great culture, like this is increasingly difficult to kind of authentically get in front of these people and kind of give them a hug and say, look, you matter so much. And it's true, but it's just harder to do when you can't do it yourself and even your exec team doesn't have as much time. I mean, what have you seen? It's a key question to avoiding becoming a big, boring company.
I've honestly, well, first of all, it's fucking hard. But number two, I've honestly seen it go wrong more than I've seen it go right with some of the clients that we hire. I think the general thought process for a lot of people, and this often comes from investors, like the VCs are pushing companies to do this, is bringing in extremely senior executives who come from some of these much, much larger, like 5 to 50,000, person companies, because, they quote unquote know how to manage. They quote unquote know how to create systems. They quote unquote know how to build something that's large and almost that has a lot of foundational elements, because they've come from let's say SAP or something like that. That's like in a worldwide leader. And unfortunately, what I've seen is those people bring a lot of those big company politics into the organization. And there's a lot of ego, and there isn't that sort of like rolling up their sleeves and kind of doing the work with the people below them. But those people are very good at managing up. So the CEO at times doesn't realize what's happening for a really long time. And I've honestly just seen that go wrong. So I think the best thing I've seen work is don't get that sort of like inkling to feel like you need to bring in that ultra senior executive who doesn't have startup experience, even when you are 200, 300, 400 people. Like maybe that person is right for you after you've IPO'd. But we've been brought in to replace that person multiple times because unfortunately they don't work out. And that's advice I give a lot of our startup CEOs as well, because they ask for that person. We want that person who's managed hundreds of people, who has, those foundational elements that we as a startup don't have. And, they go get a senior executive from Microsoft or something like that, because they're like, we're all junior here. We're all startup people. We don't really understand how to build a big company. But 6 to 12 months down the road, that hire just almost always goes wrong, because they don't know how to switch to a company where their contributions are directly responsible for the company being a failure or success or not, right? Microsoft, with or without you, it'll be there. So what your agenda is in that role is going to be different. So I think just what I've seen with companies do it right is keep hiring those people who are kind of startup-y, and hire people who, the other thing I think goes well that a lot of our clients don't love, but I try to push on them, and I'll lose this battle all the time, is hire someone who has something to gain. Like they still kind of fall a little short on certain areas of experience or knowledge, because they're going to work toward getting better at that, over the next 1, 2, 3 years. And that's what's going to keep them in the role. Much like you said, you have to keep the company fresh every year to keep people motivated, and keep the right people motivated. The ones who want a stale role, they maybe aren't the best ones to stay with the company for a really long time. But, hire someone who's just maybe came from a different industry, but they have the right functional skills. Like they're a great product manager, but like they've never done real estate before, but they've done really well with, some other marketplace business, or like a fintech app or something else. Give them the opportunity in your organization, and, there's going to be a learning curve, and that excites certain people.
Yeah, I often see it. I completely agree with your comments, and like it often comes from the board. So, as we go back to that, like scale from like the venture one to the growth one, at that intersection, and like luckily I did find the intersection between like someone who could operate at scale, but someone who was scrappy. And it took me a while to find the COO, but I found him. But so many CEOs I speak to have this hire imposed on them by the board, where like these CEOs just didn't scale to the next level. And so the board are well intended, because they're pointing out the right observation that you need to be a different CEO with potentially a different team for the next stage of the company. But unless you've seen it work well, you don't know what it looks like. So it's very easy to go and satisfy the board, to your point, Anish, about someone who's good at reporting to the CEO and actually also good at reporting to the board and showing really well in board meetings. But then in between those board meetings, they don't do anything. Like they're just there. That's a risky reality that many startups, and like you mentioned, have made that mistake because it was kind of imposed on them by their board. So again, well intended by the board, poor consequences, and then they fall back on actually this hybrid exec that can roll their sleeves up. But it's so predictable, like clockwork, at around that like Series B, Series C time. It happens to 6 out of 10 companies, and they don't know how to do it, and it's really hard. We didn't know how to do it either.
And how do you have that conversation with the board at that point? And also, a lot of my friends who were founders and CEOs who took a company to a Series A, possibly even a Series B, were themselves pushed out by the investors, and they put in someone who was sort of like a corporate senior executive as a CEO of the company. So it seems like a very difficult conversation, where if you push too hard and say, like, I'm not listening to you guys, they're gonna maybe get rid of you. But then if you completely succumb to them, you've just suddenly lost control of your own team below you, and you're just hiring whoever they want. Like, is that, and I haven't been in those direct conversations before, so I don't know if, like, do you have a leash to sort of say, look, I hear what you're saying, but this is what I want to do to help resolve it, or is it just that leash isn't there?
Yeah, the best CEOs have that leash. Like the best CEOs talk back to their board. Like I don't think a board wants a CEO who just takes the first term sheet they give them, or they don't want a CEO who just takes every idea they mention in a board meeting and like puts it in a product. I think great CEOs that I aspire to be, but I have a lot more work to do to get there. They push on their board all the time, and they push back. And so in our story, our board, as we were scaling, our consumer numbers were on fire, but our revenue was taking slower to come behind it on our path to first doing 10 and now chasing 100. But in our first step to get to 10, I think they were like, you guys have several million users a month. You should be way north of 10. This was like 3 years ago. And I pushed back for a year because I didn't want to lose the culture. Because, you bring in that executive, what happens to the people that got you to this stage? How do you retain them? Because they have so much institutional knowledge, while also leveling them by bringing in a COO who's actually going to sit on top of them. And for a year, I felt the board were kind of nudging us to do this too early. And then, so I don't necessarily think I was wrong on that, but I was wrong that the right hire couldn't level us up and attract a whole new level of talent and a whole new level of growth. Because eventually when I started interviewing, and it took me 8 months to find our COO. But he's phenomenal. The board turned out to be right. So to your leash comment, the best CEOs do push back, but they take the feedback and they test the market to see what it looks like. But for anyone out there trying to do this, 9 out of 10 of the people you're going to meet are going to be time wasters and big corporate execs who aren't going to be able to do anything. But 1 out of 10, you're going to meet them and you're going to be like, shit, that is what the board meant. And one other thing I'll talk about is there's kind of this like wonky chart I've seen about like the zone of genius, which is basically like a 2x2 of like the stuff you're good at and the stuff you enjoy doing on the 2 axes. And a lot of executives end up doing stuff they're good at, but they don't enjoy. So they're in that quadrant. Hiring a COO who compliments you, so there's someone who does stuff you don't want to do. As a CEO, you can get into your zone of genius, which sounds like a ridiculous like kind of quadrant, but it's like stuff you're good at and it's stuff you love doing. So for me, it's kind of like fundraising, press, strategy, product influence. I don't want to run the day-to-day like sales team or operational team because I'm not the best person to do it. I don't come from that background. And so turns out there are loads of people who love doing that, who want that job. And so I think the board were right to point out that I could do the stuff that I'm uniquely able to do and have someone else do the other stuff that they're uniquely able to do. And I don't have to do it all. It just took me a while to realize that they were right and to pick the right time to make the switch. The easiest way to test whether they're right or wrong is meet 20 COOs or meet 20 executives that they're pushing you to hire. If all 20 aren't good fits, maybe you're right. But I'm willing to bet that if 1 or 2 are good fits, there's someone out there who can alleviate a whole world of pain for you.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess it only made sense to you that they maybe had a good point, probably maybe when you met the right person.
That was it.
Cool.
Well, that was it. It's like getting married, right? Like to use a random example. I didn't like go out in life to get married. It's like I was like I'm an only child. I'm pretty independent. Like I was very happy on my own. And then like when I met my wife, it was like, well, that I'm done. Like this is the right thing. And like, you know, to use the metaphor, I mean, you are kind of getting married to the people you hire. You spend more time with them than you do with your family and your significant other. So it really matters that you like them. And it's kind of the same that like you may not be going out to look for a COO or a CMO, but when you meet the right person, it's like all you can think about and you have to go and hire them.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right at that point. And that's exciting that you found the right people. So you've been very honest at saying, look, you've had plenty of failures. You know, can you pinpoint one? And it doesn't, you know, I think putting the pressure on to say the biggest might be hard unless it's really obvious what the biggest one was. But you know, anything that comes to mind that was, you know, fairly large and that you took away some awesome learnings from?
Yeah, I think in 2017, we obviously Zumper is our core brand. We also own this other platform called PadMapper that we acquired in 2016. And when we did that, there was a lot of integration work, and I kind of took my eye off the ball in terms of culture. And even with a company of like 25, 30 people, I stopped interviewing everyone. And for 1 year, I kind of gave in to my team who was super stretched, saying, I'm dying. I just need to interview. I need someone to come in. If they're a 7 out of 10 instead of an 8 or a 9 or a 10, it's okay. Even a 6 out of 10, I just need warm bodies. And I really regret saying yes to that because it's a very easy argument to say yes. And you're empathetic as a CEO, hopefully, so you feel for your team. But we hired a bunch of people that year that just didn't work out. And it wasn't their fault. Like, I think we were the wrong stage company for them and they were the wrong hire for us at that stage of company. And I could have seen it coming, but I took my eye off the ball of hiring and culture for a year while I kind of integrated this other company and also raised our Series B, which was a really hard round to raise in a bad year for fundraising in 2016. And I really regret it because it probably set us back a year in terms of talent because a lot of those people are no longer at the company. And we don't really have a high churn rate. We keep 90% of our best people forever. And like, we have a fantastic culture, but that year we just did not do a good job. And it sucks for us. And it also sucks the people that made a career bet on us, even though they were probably the wrong candidate for the role and they lasted 10 months. And so I feel a lot of regret for that year. And I hope I won't do that again.
Cool. It sounds like you have a pretty major learning. So, you know, at the end of the day, you had to go through that process to come out the other end. So here's a very, very broad question. What inspires you? And, obviously you've taken a lot of personal and professional risks to continue to grow this company. You've taken on a lot of funding, which comes with crazy amounts of pressure. So like what inspires you through all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the mission of our company, we think about it every day. It sounds so lame and trite to say it, but it's true. Like, make renting an apartment as easy as booking a hotel. The idea for Zumper came when I was an undergrad in the UK, and I moved out. This is back in like 2003. Like moving out of college accommodation into the private market. This is around where the internet was just starting. Even then, it seemed crazy that like people used to camp outside like property management offices in the UK for when the new inventory came to market. And like, even then it was like, okay, cool. You can create a listing site. I get it. But like, how is the transaction for this huge purchase, the biggest economic event of your life as a renter? Why is this not online? Like, how is this happening offline? And that was true in 2003. And here we are in 2020. And Zumper has a majority of our revenue already comes from transactions. So not just making money like Zillow does, like lead gen, but actually powering transactions for our small landlords like Airbnb does for short-term rentals. We do for long-term rentals, and taking a slice of the transaction. But we've barely started. And like most people know, Zumper is a search platform, not as a booking platform, but we're moving that direction. So that kind of inspires me and gets me out of bed. And like most people who join Zumper can connect with that, because all of us have had shitty moving experiences, and like we're the only company right now who's going to solve it. There are some big public companies in our space, but they're kind of great at lead gen, and that's what they've done for decades. Where we've got this slightly other approach that inspires me. And then like, I know I love my family. I want them to be proud of what I'm doing. And then like, when I think about when I'm 80 and I look back on like what we did and this crazy time we live in, I kind of inspired to like make my team successful. Like, I've got some people on our team who are junior, who hopefully this is going to be a home run for them, and like they can do whatever they want after Zumper. I would love that if that was true. But then I also have people who are kind of in their 40s. They've maybe worked in tech for 20 years and never had like a big win. And I'd love it if Zumper was a big win for them. And it's not about the money. It was just more like emotionally, they did something that really mattered, and like someone else like agreed or valued it that way. That's really cool. And like changing people's lives like that internally is like very motivating. And like, I think most CEOs would agree. It's like, you'll be fine as a CEO. If the company fails, your experience will probably be fine. You could do another startup and raise a bunch of money yesterday. But to take your team who didn't have that opportunity and to give them the opportunity to do that, that's awesome. So I think that I wouldn't say that inspires me, but it's kind of very motivating if we get this right.
That's awesome. And it just shows you really care about the team you built. And I'd say it's not true of all CEOs who really care about the team that's below them, right? They're pretty selfish, and they're just looking to kind of drive as much success for themselves, and people below them are expendable when necessary. So I think your approach is not. I would halt at saying that it's a universal approach for all CEOs. So I have a hard stop in 6 minutes. So if someone has like a burning question they want to put in the chat or the Q&A, please do. Oh, this is actually a good one. Okay. What is one thing that would make Zumper's culture even more impactful? Have you guys fell short somewhere and you're like, man, we got to get this right, but we haven't gotten it right yet?
Yeah, we talk a lot about transparency as one of our key values, and we're very transparent. Like, we show every number in the business every Monday at 12:30 Pacific. We just had our quarterly kickoff where we show every number in the business, every revenue number, cost numbers, headcount numbers. I think there's one level more transparency that we don't do that I love to do, which is like, for example, when we exit people from the business or people leave the business, like we still like, there's this awkwardness between transparency and giving people the grace to leave on their terms, where like, if we fire someone, we're not transparent about it. Like we want to leave people kind of with their heads up. But I also think it's inauthentic to our culture because we say we're very honest. So I've never figured out a good way to do that, where we obviously announce all our new joiners, but when say someone doesn't scale to the next level, I've never figured out a way which is authentic to our culture. And I think people would appreciate how brutally honest we are of kind of telling people what happened while still allowing someone to have their dignity and their grace. So I think transparency is key, and we're almost brilliant at it, but we're not quite. And I want to get one better.
Interesting. And just to be clear, it's transparency to the rest of the team that's still in the company of why, someone who just parted ways, why they're no longer there.
Yeah, I just think it's crazy sometimes that like we show like our revenue numbers, our burn numbers, how much money we have in the bank, like really radical candor. But then sometimes we're not honest about like why we made a personnel change. But I understand why we don't. It's about grace and like giving people their story. But I think when I talk to other CEOs, it's often like the biggest like counterpoint to their culture, which is we all talk about transparency and preach it, and yet we don't fully live it. And that's one example of that. There are other examples of transparency, like when something really bad happens, do I tell my team immediately? Like, of course not. I try and digest it before like coming back with a plan. I love to make our culture one notch higher on transparency, where I trusted our team to deal with the information with grace. I do trust them. I just think that like sometimes that can be harmful. And so there's this like tension.
It's hard. It's really hard. And I don't have the answer to that either, but from some blog posts I've read from other CEOs, they mentioned that was one of the biggest turning points is when things went wrong, they didn't keep it to themselves. Where for, years they would run a company being like, okay, if I tell people about this thing going wrong, they're going to flip out. They're going to start interviewing for new companies. They're going to, worry about their livelihood and, whether they're able to feed their children. So I'm just going to keep this to myself. And then when they sort of one day were like, oh, fuck it, let me just tell someone. I'm like, I need like 15 therapists right now. I got to tell someone what's happening. They're like, they felt like the team around them like stepped up and we're like, no, we're going to solve it together. We're not jumping ship just because something didn't go right. But again, it's a very tough thing to overcome and say, all right, I'm going to do this because you're scared of the repercussions. Makes a ton of sense. How do you be transparent with the whole company when someone is let go for performance reasons? Maybe just wording it really well. I don't know.
I don't have a good answer, and I've never heard a good answer. And I talk to those the whole time. I don't think the company should ever like write a response. I think like taking away the voice of the person leaving is the wrong call. But I actually genuinely don't know the answer. Like right now, the way we run it is the person leaving typically sends an email or a Slack to the people they've worked really closely with just their narrative, and like we don't say anything publicly. But it's kind of weird because sometimes people leave sometimes it's mutual, sometimes it's not a good fit for them, it's not a good fit for us, and we haven't found a medium to tell the company about it. So right now, the person leaves on their own terms, emails a subset of people, and then the managers tell their teams the next Monday morning to make sure there are no interdependencies missed. Mm-hmm. Still feels weird, given we announced like every new joiner to the company, and we don't have a good way of expressing that. It's actually, from a transparency perspective, I think the most common problem I see with CEOs. Most CEOs are happy to disclose burn numbers above that because they're trying to do the right thing. But I'm all for transparency, but there are lots of subsets of it that are very difficult that I haven't solved. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know.
Well, if we get emailed some phenomenal ideas on how to take that on, we'll definitely send them your way. Thank you so much for joining. You basically covered such an incredibly wide range of topics, and I have no doubt that everyone who's been listening along learned a ton of things from your journey. And I would say not just the journey, but the humility. Like I really think anyone who's reached a certain level, they have more humility than sort of proudness, because they know there's so much further to go. And so I appreciate all your humility and honesty, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Karu. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.